guys, I'm Sandy. Thanks for joining our quilt along. I am finishing up pressing the last of my strips here. I know most of us are familiar with jelly rolls and use of them. Those seams in the middle of the creases tend to be a little bit of a pain to get rid of. So today I'm using Best Press. It's something I picked up at Joann's Fabrics, but a lot of people make their own version of it. Lots of local quilt shops carry it. It's a little pricey. In the local quilt shops, I found this bottle. It's fairly generous. It was on sale for like $7 or $8. And I'm just finishing up the last couple blocks or strips that we are doing. This particular set, I'm going to be cutting into squares for a demonstration on the individual patchwork version of this quilt. It does take a little longer since you're sewing individual blocks, but it's not difficult. We're going to do a demonstration on chain piecing. It's pretty fun. This quilt ought to be nice and easy. We're just dealing, in the patchwork version, we're just dealing with 2 patches. We use 3 2 patches and then 1 additional rectangle to form our individual blocks. Once the blocks are formed, we're going to form up our quilts. So it's pretty easy. This is a very, this first week has a lot of stuff in it with the cutting and everything. Next week's sewing is a lot lighter. I think it's going to be fun though. I have never actually run a quilt along before. I've participated in several, but this is the first one that I have run. See, the quilt behind me is one of the first ones I ever did, and I really like it. I think it was 3-inch blocks, 3 or 3.5-inch blocks, and a friend of mine designed it. That was the first class I ever took. I think this quilt is a great quilt for beginners, but it's also fun enough for people with a knowledge of quilting to do and enjoy. And this group is awesome. So there is tons and tons of wisdom in this group. Lots of people know how to quilt. So if anybody sees questions they want to answer, I'm not the only one who can answer questions. If you can answer something and help someone, please feel free. I know several of you have been doing that, and I appreciate you so much. Quilting is better together, which is why I volunteered to run this first ever quilt along. If this one goes well, we'll definitely do some more because I think it's been fun. Several of the other quilts that we looked at doing actually have directions, so they won't be as difficult to get moving along. We just use their instructions and we'll just break it into steps. I'm done with pressing that particular batch. I'll have to do another batch later. I'm going to do both versions, the strip quilting and the pieced. This is the pieced version. So I'm going to do a quick quilting or cutting demonstration. I'm sure most of you have all of the necessary tools. There's a variety of cutting mats out there. This is one of my favorite ones. It's smaller, so it's compact, and ruler of any size. I've got multiple size rulers. I probably could get away with a much smaller one, but this is what I grabbed, so that's what I'm going to do. First step in quilting on these pre-cuts is to cut off the selvage ends. So I'm just looking at it on this. You can clearly see where my print is and where the white selvage is. So we're going to cut off the white strip. And to do that, well, the easier way to do it for me, I'm right-handed, is to just line it up. Cut off the edge, selvage is gone, and then we start measuring. I'm going to cut a couple different ones, and we're going to do a stack all at once. Just grabbing some random stacks out of or strips out of the stack I just cut, and we'll have a couple to work with. So again, I'm just going to cut off those selvage edges. Since I'm right-handed, it's easier for me to cut on the right side of the ruler. I can see that the white is over here, but the dots for the selvage go further over, so I'm going all the way over to the dots and just lining up that ruler along those dots. The selvage edge, so when they sew fabric or prep fabric, weave fabric, the selvage edge is where they hook into the weaving loom and it holds it. And so all those little pinholes are where it was held into place by the machinery that does the weaving. So that part of the fabric is slightly damaged, those holes may never ever go away. We definitely don't want those holes showing in our quilt. The selvage edges also shrink at a different rate than the rest of the fabric since it's been treated differently. So we want to make sure to get rid of those so that our quilt later doesn't stretch or skew in weird ways when it is washed and dried. Some people wash their fabric ahead of time, pre-wash it. I definitely do not do that. And most of the time, I do it with batiks. I will definitely rinse batiks with Retain or one of those products that's designed to help hold the color, but I don't do it for most of the printed type fabrics. Most of them don't lose their color. I've not had a great deal of issues with that in the past. So to line these up, I'm just stacking them. I am lining them up as we go, one by one, edges together, and I'm lining them up, the fabric strips along. Some people stack them entirely. I don't tend to do that. I tend to just line them up along the lines. And so the edges will all be lined up along one side. You know what, I'm doing this backhanded again, aren't I? Oh, this is good. So I just line it up along this line here, and then the next one, we'll do the same thing, an inch up. And then just pull that so that the fabric is aligned sideways, and then move this to manually line it up there. So all those strips are basically lined up. I'm going to take my ruler. I like the Omni Grid ones, so I just count over 2.5. I find my line and I line that up against this edge that I have just created. I can also see down here that these dots line up with the yellow line that I can see at the bottom of the board, so I know that it's straight against the board and it's straight against the edge of these fabrics. Everything's lined up at 2.5. I'm just going to take one long cut, and I just cut 4 squares all at once. 1, 2, 3, 4. So those are done. I'm going to do it again. Since that edge is straight, my dots are still in alignment down here. Just line it back up on 2.5 and cut again. I'm just going to keep repeating that for a little while. Have you done a lot of these kind of patchwork quilts? I have done several. I am the queen of tiny little quilt squares. I love pre-cuts. This is one of the jelly rolls I've had for quite a while. This is one of the first jelly rolls I think I bought. I've had it for a long time. This is the Highline. Highline? Pretty sure this is, it's old. It's a Moda line. I'm pretty sure this is called Highline. I have several of the coordinate pieces, so I'll have plenty of fabric aside for borders. We just keep going. So I told everyone to go ahead and toss these into a basket or a bucket or something. My favorite version of these sometimes is cookie tins. I have several. I happen to have cookie tins sitting here. A friend of mine gave it to me the other day, left over from Christmas cookies. So it's clean and empty, and I'm just going to toss my squares in it. Got one more string out of these few, and then I'm going to grab a few others. And I'm going to do just a few blocks of sewing so that you guys can see the steps that we were talking about. Okay, so I've got a group of 4 strips semi-cut. I'll finish those a little later. I'll grab some different colors here. I'll take that one. I'll take that one. I'll grab some of the gray down here. The gray is beautiful. Some of these fabrics are repeated in pattern but not in color. Some of them I have 2 strips of the same color. It doesn't really matter to me that they're the same or very similar. I've got quite a variety of colors, so I'm just gonna play with a bunch of them and see what we get. So again, I'm gonna remove those selvages real quick. That's always the first step to using these jelly strips, in my opinion. Get rid of the selvages. Just make sure that's laying flat. Cut off those edges. Set it aside for a second. We've got one. I tend to cut about 4 strips at a time. It tends to be my go-to number. I do try to make sure that these pinked edges are lined up. I typically try to match up to the tips against whatever line I'm looking at. So I eyeball the dots along the side of the selvage edge before I cut, but I also eyeball where these pinking lines are in alignment with the ruler grid. A couple more of these. So my sewing background is mostly garment sewing. My mom taught me to sew when I was 12. My mom used to do a ton of commercial garment sewing, like sewing factory type stuff. She used to, her auntie used to own a sewing factory in LA, and my mom worked a lot of years at home in our garage with an industrial machine. She'd drive to the factory, pick up work, drive back home, sew stuff together, the next week take it back to the factory, and that's how she was a stay-at-home mom with my baby sister for many years. They drove back and forth to LA a lot while I was in school. My sister is 10 years younger than me. My mom taught me how to sew when I was 12. I think first garments that I turned out probably around age 14 on my own. I was sewing clothes before that with my mom, but mostly I'd be the girl that ripped everything out. So I learned how to remove stitches at a young age. I grew up with a serger in our home. I grew up with a cover stitch machine. I do a lot of custom sewing, or I have done a lot of. I don't do as much of it anymore. I typically sew for people that I know and like. I have a tendency to do a lot of stuff at, you know, homecoming and prom gown season. I live in a little town. There's not a lot of skilled labor here, so there's not a seamstress shop in town. There's a quilt shop, and a couple ladies there do some sewing, but I'm a sucker for anybody with a kid who needs a prom gown hemmed or altered slightly. So I tend to do at least a couple dresses every dance for someone. I've done a couple custom gowns. I've made probably 7 wedding gowns. But my joy and fun in life is really quilting. I volunteered to do this thinking it would be a lot of fun. There's a lot of women. I didn't realize how big this group was. I really thought we were looking at a few hundred women. But did you realize there's almost 10,000 people in this group? I did not. I found out after I volunteered to do this. And it obviously wasn't a stopping factor, but wow, that's a lot of people to try to teach and keep happy. So please forgive me. I am just an ordinary lady who has a little bit of quilting knowledge and just wanted to do something fun and different with you. So I'm going to cut these few more quilt blocks, and then I'll do a quick strip piecing demonstration with a few of them. And then I'll let you go. We'll strip piece, and then we will press a few open, and I'll show you about my best press and why I like that stuff. There's a couple different products. A lot of people make their own version of a spray starch. I don't mind either one. I do have some that I've made myself, and literally it's just watered down store-bought starch. Some people actually go to the point of, you know, find their own vodka, make their own solution. I don't drink. I don't have any alcohol. I'm not an alcoholic, but I just don't have any around, and I just haven't been inclined to go get some. So, but I was at the grocery store where I do shop all the time, and found a bottle of some liquid stay starch or something like that, and I brought it home and found it was too stiff, so I thinned it with water about 50%, and that's what's in my tiny little spray bottle. I love this little sprayer. I don't even know where I got it from, but it has a really fine mist, so I like that quite a bit. The Best Press sprayer has a heavier spray. I mean, it sprays quite a lot more liquid. It saturates the fabric more, and I don't enjoy that as much, but I'm glad that we have options. You know, everyone gets to choose what they like, try different things, figure out what works best for you. So I've cut enough squares that we can do a little bit of a sewing demonstration, so we'll do that next. I told everyone to put their stuff in a bucket or a container of some sort. I have my lovely little cookie tin. So it doesn't matter how you do it, just shake everything up. Once it's all shook up, you just kind of grab it random. The point of shaking it up and kind of pulling it as a mystery is it doesn't really matter what you grab and put together in this quilt, so long as they do go together and you get a product that you're happy with. I tend to offset pinking versus not, I feel like I get a better idea as to what a square really looks like if the pinked edges and the straight edges are matched up. I have my sewing machine right here. Let's talk about this. So I don't have a scrap under my needle right now. I'm gonna take some of those selvage pieces that I just did and I'm gonna stitch those together. I almost always have a piece of scrap under here. This catches the thread so I don't have to worry about the needle. I don't know if your machine ever does that when you first turn it on. Sometimes my needle, the thread will pull right out of the needle and I won't have any thread in it, and then you're, sewing stuff that isn't actually sewing. Never any fun. So this keeps fabric under the needle all the time. I never end up losing the thread off the needle. So I'm just lining everything up on the 1/4 inch mark on my plate, the plate that goes over my bobbin case. I have a neutral thread in here. It's not white, it's not any color that's really in my quilt, but it is a very good neutral and it blends well with a lot of different colors. This quilt has both light and dark pieces. This neutral, like a light khaki or a tan, and it just blends really well with a lot of stuff. So you just stack the pieces. Doesn't really matter what you grab, just grab 2. If you grab 2 of the same, put 1 back. So this is the right side of the fabric, and you just sandwich those together. You put the 2 right sides together so you have the wrongs facing out towards you. Again, I like to alternate where my pinked edges are with the straight edge, so it forms a pretty good square. And then I just line that straight edge up on the 1/4 inch mark. Lift the presser foot a little bit, tuck that under, put the presser foot back down, and I just sew that 1/4 inch seam. And I just line it up with the markings on the throat plate there. I'll do a few more of these. They're pretty easy. Again, right sides together. Some of these pieces are light. This is light white and gray, but I just make sure I'm grabbing the right edge and just keep going. I know if you're making any of these, we make a lot of them, a lot of 2 patches are going to be necessary for this quilt. If you're sewing them this way, we're doing 2 patches, and then next week the job will be assemble 2 patches into 4 patches and 6 patches, and then the following week we're going to add in our rectangular strip, and then we'll actually have blocks. That 4th week we're looking at sewing those blocks into a full quilt top. So this isn't a difficult quilt. This week is actually the one that's probably most labor intensive. So if you don't have everything done by Friday, don't stress over it. Do you see how I'm sewing and I'm not clipping in between each one? I'm not taking the time to clip in between each one right now. There's not a lot of point to pause, more options for your thread to pull out of the needle. It takes longer, you waste more thread that way. And this is just easy, you just keep sewing. Normally I have music on, and I just sing along to the music and sew whatever box I want to work on. Grabbed a couple different pieces there. Set some aside, I'll do those in a minute. Whoops, almost did it. Make sure you're doing right sides together. Almost sewed one inside out. Not the end of the world. All of us are familiar with seam rippers, but I like getting to the end of a chain and realizing I didn't make any errors. I didn't have to stop and shorten my chain and start over again. Alrighty. This is going to be my last block I'm going to sew. But basically, that's it. When I get to the end of my line, normally I have little snippers, but I don't have those up here. I'm sewing in the kitchen today. The lighting is better up here than there is in my, I have a little sewing table in my bedroom. That's normally where I'm at. But you just snip these one by one in between. And so instead of stop, clip, sew, stop, clip, sew. This way, I just have to do this. I had started at the beginning with that little scrap. It's folded now. I'm going to just shove that back under the needle and sew a little bit on it. Now it's going to catch that thread, so it's not going to go anywhere. I'm going to just snip that off the machine. Now I've got a pile of these done. We'll go back to pressing. So we talked about pressing all of the blocks with the seams in one direction. Later on, we're going to nest those things together. But for now, where did I put my press? Oh, there it is. It's under my strips. I buried it. Fabric goes everywhere when I get busy. All right, so I've got my iron here. I'm going to shove my machine out the way. The joys of crafting in the kitchen. You kind of just shove things because not everything is where you want it. Ordinarily, I just move back and forth along the counter, but I'm trying to stay in the shot. So I'm sewing little blocks together. 1/4 inch seam along the back, and you can see that this side is front and flat. This side has the seam allowance sticking up. When I open my blocks up, I'm going to take my fingers and just run it along there and kind of flatten it out. Then I'm going to take my spray, squirt that, take the iron, set it right down on top, and just hold it. It's going to press it. The pressure that you put down, you actually want to apply pressure. That's why it's called pressing. If you iron these strips, those creases are never going to come out. You use a little bit of a spritz. You can use plain water even if you want. That steam and the pressure are going to hopefully remove most of those wrinkles. This is now pressed wide open. The seam is now flat against the back, and it all goes one direction. I'm going to do another one of those. I'm going to show you why it's important that these seams get pressed open well. So again, I've opened it. I'm going to use my fingers and kind of press that seam open, spritz it with some spray, and push down. I do have the steam function on. These are straight squares. They're not really going to skew a whole lot. We're not sewing triangles. Sometimes I don't use steam, a lot of steam if we're doing triangles. Those tend to skew more and they're easier to skew, but simple squares ought not skew a whole lot as long as you're, you know, cutting straight lines. The grain should be fine. Just finger press that open, squirt, press. Sometimes I play with the next one while I'm waiting for the press. I don't always move the square as I do it. Some people like to press their squares open, like seams wide open instead and flat. They do fold flatter, but there's a benefit to folding them all in one direction. And I can show you what that is here in just a second. I've got 3 more to do. Actually, I only have to do 2 of them. So open, finger press, spritz, and press. We'll do these last couple. Switch the needle in my machine. Sometimes it starts skipping. When the needles get dull, it starts skipping stitches. It looks like this one's got maybe a bit of a skip stitch underneath, so. Oh, no, it's not. It's just a loose thread tucked under there. Okay, so I'm done with the pressing for now. I'm done with the little blocks for now. Obviously, we got lots and lots more blocks to sew, but I just wanted to show you why we pressed it one direction. So we're pressing the whole thing one direction. We press the other one, you know, one direction. We're going to take them and place them right sides together in facing opposite directions. So the bottom piece, the selvage goes to my left, to your right. Well, I don't know how it looks in reverse. I don't know if it is in reverse. The top piece, the selvage edge is flat and it's folded to my right side so that they go in opposite directions. The reason that matters is so that when you go to sew this 2-patch, you're going to sew this along the edge, right? 1/4 inch in. As you sew these, those 2 pieces are going to pull together and it's going to create this awesome little nesting effect where the seam allowances form this awesome, perfect little, you know, weld. So you've got seam press this way, seam press this way. When they come together, they line up and they nest and there's no space in between. And when you do that, you get beautiful, perfect little seams. So we'll talk more about that next week. But this week, all we're doing is 2 patches if you're doing the traditional patchwork. It's nice to meet you all. If you have questions, please let me know. Have a great night.